Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to the second Patreon video. Once again, thank you very much for supporting the podcast financially. I know we harp on about this, but it does make things significantly easier. Running creative endeavors at a loss, always a frustrating thing to do. So we are more than grateful for all the support that we're able to get. Now, in this, the second installment of the supporters videos, I'm a little sorry to say, I think the standards have already dropped a tad. I am fresh, not out of the shower, in my oldest work clothes I use for getting about the garden. So I don't know what kind of trajectory this is going to set, but let me say, I don't think it's a good one per se. Frustrating, but that's okay. We will push on, we'll persevere, we'll adapt and survive. Today I wanted to give you a little bit of an insight into the personalities at play in the Three Views On podcast. If you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time now, you will notice the relative substances that people are made up of. We've got Michael Laws, Simon, and myself, Paul Matthews. But I wanted to dive into a little bit what exactly makes up these characters. Try and get behind the curtain. I mean, when you've only got 20, 30, 40 minutes with someone at a time, and they're not even talking to you, it can be a little hard to try and ascertain what exactly someone is made of. So I want to today have a bit of a look into who these guys are, what makes them tick. And I think we start off with Simon. Now, Simon, the old simple Simon, doesn't quite cut it for this guy. He's a complex, and I would even contend with you today, my friends, a deeply ironic character. Okay, there is a very deep irony that lies at the very heart of what Simon Glover is about. All three of us are Christians. He's a very conservative man. You don't drop any cuss words when you're around him. That's just not going to end well for you. Let me tell you from the limited experience I have. Let me get to the irony. All right, he is the youngest of the bunch, Simon, the youngest man, and in a sense, there's a childlike sort of youthful enthusiasm to this guy, no doubt about it. So Simon has a habit that he has alluded to in some detail. He loves making model train landscapes. So it's not just like a train track that you piece together and get your Duplo train to run along. We're talking here like detailed landscapes. He was telling me about how he's able to get synthetic grass, which he orders online in small bags. He gets it magnetized and then drops it. And so the polarized end points down or up or something, and it all stands on its end like normal grass. Now that, again, it's a solution to a problem that only someone who had certain interests would ever have. I mean, we're talking about how to make synthetic grass on a model train landscape here. So there's an element where Simon is into his hobbies. As I said, the youthful enthusiasm is there. He is not yet jaded. There's no way to really describe it other than there are certain childlike qualities. But here's the irony, and don't read that in a negative way. I think it's fantastic, and I admire that. The irony is it is also the oldest soul in the Three Views On cast. By far. He dated his now wife for ages, very patient, very steady, as far as that goes. So, I mean, again, that's something that I've not been able to pull out. He dated Lucinda for like 7 years or something ridiculous, something crazy. He's only 13 now, I think. Anyway, so he's the first one to get married. So he's youngest, first one to get married, settle down, move into the house with his wife, do all that sort of stuff. So that's adding to the other ledge. You've got the youthful exuberance. Here we've got the sort of old, steady, slow sailing soul on this side. And he's got a child. Simon is a father. He's an actual biological father of his daughter. So, I mean, see what I mean when I talk about the deep, ingrained irony, youthful exuberance, old soul. And this makes him quite a complex character. Now, as far as the podcast goes, he's pretty good with the one-liners, old Simon. He's not bad with the one-liners. He's fairly quick off the mark. He's good with a certain level of cultural engagement. So if we're talking anything to do with DC or Marvel, Simon is your guy. Anything to do with niche Christian markets like Colin Buchanan songs or old Don Francisco albums, Simon is also your guy. Not very exportable, those traits, especially the niche Christian stuff. That's okay. That's okay. Simon is into certain areas of popular culture to quite a high degree. So he is a sort of a subject matter expert in a number of things, which makes Interplay interesting, because with someone like me who has a sort of low level of knowledge but about a broad number of things, it certainly makes him able to interact in a far more meaningful way in some situations where we're talking about things that he's interested in. He's able to sort of platform off my very limited knowledge. And that's probably Simon. If I had to liken him to a weapon, and no one asked me to, I just will. If I had to liken him to a weapon, it would be an arrow. So he's got a fairly small what is the word? How would you describe it? He's very specific. So he can just go in and he can get really deep in one area quite quickly. Woof, like an arrow. That's the weapon I would liken him to. Now this brings us to the second component of the Three Views on Cast, Michael Laws. Now, what can be said about Michael Laws that hasn't been said about Da Vinci, Plato, Socrates? The guy is a mind. If Simon has a very high level of knowledge about a very few things, Michael has a very high knowledge of everything, which is a real pain in my backside, because he's just, I remember meeting this guy and thinking, there's got to be something out there where I actually surpass his level of knowledge or skill. There has to be. Just odds on, there's got to be. And there wasn't. Very, very frustratingly, there wasn't. I would be talking with him, and I'd be working on a particular idea, theological, and he'd come out with a way more nuanced view. I think, okay, well, I can't out-reason this guy. At least I can play the guitar. I can't play the guitar better than him. I see him over there playing it. Oh, brother. At least I can interact and engage and be more friendly than. No, I can't. Well, maybe I can cook better. No, I can't cook better either. There is actually really there is nothing. It's quite frustrating. He seems to be fitted with the world's largest battery. The guy's got energy to burn. I remember I was actually running an evangelistic program for the University Fellowship of Christians, and I wanted him to take over from me, because I'd run it 3 times or so, and I was getting to the end of my tether. And I said, hey, look, man, do you reckon you could help me out? Now, I went into this meeting, I mean, like, there's no way. I think he was about to become president of the Uni Fellowship. He was in his, like, 2nd or 3rd year of doing his med degree. He was doing 1 million other things. I think he was involved in the medical society and all this sort of stuff. Busy guy. Already, I thought, at his limit, I thought, there's no way. But he might help me. And he said, yes. He said, I'll just do it. Not only did he say he would do it, he had 47 other ideas that this is how we could bring it forward. This is how we could advance this course. Just off the bat, the guy's not bad. The guy is not bad. He is, as I said, frustratingly good at these sorts of things. This means that he can basically talk at length on most things, probably most things he could talk at, which again helps out, because he is able to. He's basically the beating heart of the podcast. Let me just put that out there. So he's the one who will usually guide and direct the conversation. I think in the episode that will have just come out, the one about his summer, I had to have a crack at guiding and mediating that conversation. I was swimming in shark-infested water that was 2 meters over my head. I did not know what was going on. Michael somehow does it with ease. So keep your eye out for that, for Paul Matthews floundering to try and float a podcast. If I had to, Michael, one thing that he did, I think he's not as quick as Simon with the one-liners. He hasn't got bad one-liners, don't get me wrong, not a negative. But his points often have a degree of nuance to them. And so he will take a little while to get going on certain points. If I had to liken him to a weapon, again, no one asked me to. If I had to liken him to a weapon, I would say he's like a trebuchet, probably. It's an ancient medieval piece of machinery that essentially would cast big boulders and have a wide array of damage. But it took a while to wind up. All right, so you had to crank onto this thing. You had to get a couple of guys. It's kind of like Michael. You got to let him run his ideas out, explain the nuance of his understanding. But then once it's out there, it's going to be a powerful weapon of a thing. Let me tell you that. That's Michael Laws. Now, lastly here, we got Paul Matthews, me. Now, I try to steer clear of being biased towards myself because that's something that I probably would do quite naturally if given the chance, if allowed to talk about myself for a long time. So I'm not going to do that. One word, Simon alluded to it earlier in the last episode. He said fickle. Fickle, I don't think it's a little too pejorative. The word I would use is mercurial, which is, it comes from Mercury, which heats and expands quickly and cools and contracts quite quickly too. So that's probably me. I get quite excited about things. I have a lot of passion, but that passion, I feel like if there's a negative that can be said about it, it is directed and redirected and misdirected fairly often. So I myself, as far as being keen for the podcast goes, I have gotten keener than anyone many, many times. Let's do all these things. Let's go pursue these endeavors. Let's really push this thing. And then I've also just been I've nearly quit and actually quit a couple of times. So like that's me. Fairly up, and the ups are good. Fairly downs not so good. Now me when it comes to the interplay in the podcast, the one-liners, I'm good. If I'm allowed to give myself a little bit of credit, I'm good with the one-liners, I think. As soon as it goes past the one line, though, is potentially where I start to struggle. I can be fairly, I can run out of gas, I think. If given the time, if people just let me run on, I can generally peter out, run out of steam. This is good, having Michael and Simon alongside me. I think we complement each other quite well. We're like the primary colours, and we sort of are able to produce varying things to varying degrees with the interplay between our personalities. I myself, as an insight into me, fairly black and white. And so I'll often represent fairly strong views on the podcast and have them mediated or pushed back on by Michael and Simon. So that's the way that sort of works. I think in that way, we will often, it's the classic thesis, antithesis, synthesis sort of thing. I'll come in with this crazy thesis, this crazy idea, often going a little bit too far in one direction or more. And then the other guys will push back, bit of an antithesis. So sort of the opposite of that, pulling in the other direction, and then we will sort of end up coming in to the center point with a slightly more nuanced, well understood idea. And so that's how the interplay between the three personalities works. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on whether I've necessarily called this right. I do have a fairly biased, I'm in the podcast. I am myself, so I probably don't have a very objective view of me. I would love to hear if any of you guys have any other ideas on potentially sort of some character traits that I might have missed, or just got plain wrong. Some things I got plain wrong. I'm assuming when Michael and Simon see this, they might say, hey, I think he got that totally wrong. But I don't think so. I think I know those guys pretty well. We're in our third season of recording the podcast, and we were mates for a little while before that. So look, that is it. That is the insight that I have into the three views on Enigma that I've gathered and sort of scraped together over the while that I've been in the podcast. I would love, as I said, to hear thoughts, but I would back myself. I'd back myself on calling this one fairly correctly. Anyway, as far as the second installment of our Patreon supporters video, that's it. That's run its course. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope somehow this is able to add some explanatory power into the podcast. Next time you watch it, you might be able to have a little bit of a lens or a framework from which to view the events that unfold on the podcast. So I really hope that's been illuminating for you in some degree. Anyway, thanks again, my friends, and I will see you next time.